So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors, and today we are going to make a Warlock. Jeff and I had a little bit of spare time. James won't be joining us tonight, but Jeff and I thought, you know what? Let's make some more characters. If you have not yet made a character, we highly recommend that you go back in the Learn to Play series and watch us make a Dwarven Fighter where we're going to explain everything piece by piece. This video is going to be a little quicker paced. We'll still explain things, but it's not going to be the level of depth that you're going to get from that. So we're going to make a Warlock. Our race that we chose is a Tiefling, just because the Warlock's core stat is Charisma. The Tiefling's stat bump is Charisma, so we're going to go with that as a kind of general starting point. So grab your character sheets. Let's get ready. Jeff, where do we want to put the stats for this Tiefling Warlock? And I will man the PDF here.
Yeah, so for this character, we are going to be using, just for simplicity and for time's sake, just the regular standard array. So that'll be, 6 stats, and we'll get a 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8, which we will assign wherever we please. So, as Tim mentioned, the Warlock's main stat is Charisma. That's what all their spell casting is based off of. So we're going to want to make sure that one starts out nice and high. Now, we can, because the Tieflings get a +2 to their Charisma and a +1 to their Intelligence, we can, if we want to, save the 15 for another stat, because we'll get, if we use the 14 in the Charisma, we can still get it to a 16 to get the +3 modifier instead of the +2 modifier, which is the nice little bump. So let's go ahead and I'm going to put the 15 in. Let's do Intelligence, actually.
Perfect. Yep.
So we also get a stat bump to that as a Tiefling. And then the 14 can go into Charisma.
Perfect.
Let's do the 13 in. Let's do Constitution.
Yep.
Always useful.
Keep
no matter what character
alive.
you are.
Yeah.
And then let's do Wisdom. Or I think we're on the 12.
Yep.
And then let's do 10 Dexterity and 8 Strength.
Love it.
So that should all be, pre ability improvements as a Tiefling. But I guess we can go ahead and just factor that in right now while we're kind of on the ability scores, make it a little faster and easier. So we'll get a +2 to our Charisma, which should put it at a 16, and a +1 to our Intelligence, which should put that at a 16 as well.
And remember, we're getting that from the fact that we chose Tiefling as a race, which gives you ability score bumps. All of the races give you ability score bumps. So we just shortcutted that. We're not going to be looking at the PDF. Another thing to quickly mention is we are dipping into full 5e here, 5th edition. So in the first video, we made sure to keep it extremely limited to the basic rules so that you could see everything we were doing in the PDF. This, not so. We're going into the full rules, so check out D&D Beyond or get yourself a player's handbook if you want to look at what we're talking about. And voila, you will see all the modifiers appear there, and that is because there is a chart in any of the books that you use. They tell you exactly what number gives you what modifier. We just plug those in there. Again, we covered that in the last video, and it's written in the book, but let's move along. Speed of 30 feet. Dark vision. You can't discern color in darkness, only shades of gray. Hellish resistance. You have resistance to fire damage. Infernal legacy. Whoa, that's actually a long one. When I snap that into existence, that's half of the features and traits box. Jeff, do you want to explain that one a little more?
Yes. So there's a couple things on that the Tiefling is getting here that was not featured in our dwarf character creation video yet. So if you're watching all these in order, this will be a couple of new things here. So try to cover just super quickly what some of these things are. So real quick, the Hellish Resistance, it says we get resistance to fire damage. I don't think we've talked about resistance yet in any of the videos that we've done so far. So just real quick, what that means is if you take damage that you have a type of resistance to, you take half the damage that you normally would take. 5e will always round down if you ever have to half, unless the ability or spell or whatever it is specifically tells you to round up in that instance, you always round down. So that's all hellish resistance means, that if you get hit with a fireball, anything that does fire damage at all, you take half the normal damage. If you need to round, you round down. And that's all resistance is. And then, yeah, the one that Tim mentioned here, that Infernal Legacy, that's a little bit more of a complicated one than some of the other things that we've seen from these racial traits, especially because this one is giving us magic. So while we're making our character right here at level 1, the first part is really the important one, because the other ones we don't have yet. We'll still talk about them very briefly. But the first thing that we'll get is the Thaumaturgy Cantrip, which will be an interesting addition. So that'll actually be a different part on the character sheet that we'll add that to down in the spell sheet section, which should be the 3rd page.
Now, we're going to wait because we're going to add our spells later. So we just have to remember that. So we're not going to do that on the sheet now, but when we do add our spells, we will remember to add Thaumaturgy.
And yeah, the rest of this ability here will grant us additional uses of spells as we get higher levels. So if this character, we start to play them out and they level up a couple times to level 3, we then get a 1 free use of the Hellish Rebuke spell, which we can use without using any of our spell slots or anything like that. And we'll talk about spell slots a little bit later in this video when we get to, picking our spells and our class features and stuff like that. Which comes back automatically after a long rest. And then again, at 5th level, we get another spell that we can use for free, Darkness. And conveniently, this trait specifies that Charisma is our spellcasting ability for these spells, which is also happens to be our Warlock spell ability modifier. So we won't have to keep track of any separate modifiers or ability types or anything like that. We'll just know everything is Charisma. And we'll cover a little bit more about, what these spells do and how exactly all that works a little bit later on, once we start to get into classes and picking our spells and all that sort of thing.
And then finally, from our race, we get Common and Infernal as languages that we can speak. Now remember, our intelligence increases by 1 and our charisma by 2, but we already did that. So that would also be listed there, but we did that when we were already knocking out our ability scores. Either way is fine. If you don't remember to do that, or if you don't know the races well enough to do that, totally cool. At this point, you jump over to your ability scores, you'd add those, and you would change any of the modifiers if necessary.
So now we're ready to get into our class features. That's going to be the meat of the character creation here. Definitely the biggest scope out of all the little things that we have to add. This top section we'll roll through pretty quickly, just the basic HP and proficiencies and saving throws and things like that all the classes get that we've talked about in other videos. So we'll just kind of move on and get those marked down so we can get into the good stuff. So as a Warlock, our hit dice is a D8. At 1st level, we get 8 hit points, so max of the D8, plus our Constitution modifier, which I believe is a +1. So that should put us at 9 HP to start off with. We'll get light armor and simple weapons that we'll be able to add to our proficiencies. No tool proficiencies for the Warlock. And then we get Wisdom and Charisma as our saving throw proficiencies that we'll be able to tick off those boxes for. And then we also need to pick some skills. Now, I'm going to go ahead and cheat and jump ahead a little bit. I already know what background we're going to be picking for this character. So we've already talked about it, and that's going to be the Hermit. We'll talk about most of the stuff about the Hermit later, but the stuff that we can take now, just to speed up the process here, is just the skill proficiencies that they get, which is Medicine and Religion. So we can go ahead and mark those off, just so we know that when we're picking skills here, and we can choose things that are not that, and know that we're good. So looking at what the Warlock has access to here, I'm always a fan of taking Arcana when I'm playing a spellcaster, especially because we have a nice, juicy intelligence modifier for this Warlock. So give them some magical knowledge that they'll be able to have gotten, which is always very helpful. I think let's go with Intimidation, actually. For one, it makes use of our good charisma modifier, which we'll be able to take advantage of. And warlocks are always kind of, spooky and kind of on the fringe in terms of usually how they present and kind of how weird their magic can be, especially with some of the choices that I know we're going to be making pretty soon. So I think intimidation will be one that makes sense, both mechanically and narratively.
All right, you'll notice that our saving throws and our skills are now filled in. You'll also notice that we added our proficiency bonus. You'll remember our good friend, the proficiency bonus from the other video that we did. So we won't go into depth there, but just know that anywhere where we are proficient, you'll notice that I added the modifier here for my ability score and my proficiency bonus. So we are good to go on the skills. That takes a little while, so do that and then catch up with us. But moving on.
So now we'll just move on to equipment. Just make some quick choices here. Now every class has a basic starting equipment section to them where you get to pick what you start with. There are variant rules if you want to like buy equipment and stuff like that. We're not going to be doing that method. We'll just be picking from the basic starter list here. Makes it a lot faster, easier, and it's usually a pretty good deal as far as, the money would go anyways. So let's get right into the equipment stuff here. So the first thing that we get, we have the option of a light crossbow or any simple weapon. A light crossbow is totally fine with me. So a light crossbow and 20 bolts can get added to our list. The next section here, a component pouch or an arcane focus. This is mostly just a flavor decision. It doesn't have a whole lot of mechanical impact. I'm always fond of the arcane focus over the component pouch. Especially for classes like the Warlock. It's just a little sleeker in terms of visual description and things like that, but it doesn't really matter.
Tell me the difference. What's the difference between an arcane focus and a component pouch? So I know not mechanically, but like in your mind as they're making the character, so give me an idea. So when you say that, I'm making a Warlock, why not a component pouch? What's more evocative to you about something like an arcane focus?
It's mostly just an aesthetic thing for me, an aesthetic preference, where I always kind of imagine like an arcane focus allows you to just kind of like work magic at a whim, whereas a component pouch is probably something you'll have to like dig through and pick certain things out and things like that. And just for me, I just kind of prefer that sort of like at will nature. It sort of feels very warlocky to me to just be able to bring your hands up and say the words and the spell happens rather than like, if I just find that, whatever weird component, then I'll be able to do this. So it's like, and that image can be cool. And some people really dig the whole like component description thing. So like, if that's your thing, then absolutely like no shade from me on that. It's just like, it adds an extra step if to like describing spells and things like that, if that's something that you're into. So focus for me is just a little sleeker on the aesthetics, and that's just a personal thing for me.
Dig it.
So then we get the choice of either a Scholar's Pack or a Dungeoneer's Pack. We won't break down all the specifics of what's all in all of those. There's a list in the book that'll tell you exactly what you get from either one. The Scholar's Pack seems more fitting with us, given our background in our class. So we'll go ahead and add that one to the sheet as well. And then finally, we will get leather armor, 2 daggers, and any simple weapon of our choice.
And I'll just put that on the character sheet right now. What I like to do when there are options, especially because I'm a cut-paste person from either D&D Beyond or basic rules, I'll put it in brackets, as you see here. Because I know I'm going to get leather armor, any simple weapon, and 2 daggers. If there's a bracket, I know, okay, cool, I'm going to put that on the sheet, but then it reminds me to go back and actually choose a simple weapon.
So just to kind of round out our equipment here, we will go ahead and pick our simple weapon that we get. So knowing that we already get 2 daggers as a warlock for free as part of that class loadout, we will go ahead and try to round out with something a little different. Now, as a warlock, especially with the way that we've put our stats, with our strength and our dexterity both being fairly low, our weapon is probably going to be very much a last resort for us that we will only use in desperate situations where we can't use our cantrips or our spells. But, might as well have them anyways, just because you never know if that's going to come up. So just to make things simple here, we'll go ahead and take a spear. It's a nice weapon that gives some good options. You can use it two-handed, you can throw it. Just a fine D6 weapon. So it covers a lot of ground for what we want, what we need. And then we can go from there.
Killer. So I'll go ahead and put the spear in here. And you can choose anyone you want. As Jeff mentioned, it's basically a last resort. In many cases, you're not going to be on the front lines doing melee. So choose something that's fun for you or thematic, as long as it's a simple weapon, not a martial weapon like a short sword or a rapier or any of those things. So with character creation, you have to do everything at some point, but there's not a right order necessarily. So we could jump into our class stuff right now, but then we would have to take these weapons, the spear, the daggers, and make sure we put them in our attacks and spellcasting up here. We could do it that way. If you feel like jumping into class stuff, go ahead. We're probably going to keep it simple and go ahead and just put the equipment up in our attacks now while we're talking about equipment. So what does our light crossbow do? Like, what's the attack bonus? What's the damage? What is the spear? We'll probably cover armor class here because we know it's leather armor. Just round out that stuff on the character sheet so that once we jump into the actual class stuff, we know that that's going to be the last thing on the sheet. We can spend some time on it and choose some spells. So you'll see here that we have everything filled out. We filled out our armor class, which is dictated by the leather armor. And then down here we have all of our weapons. Our attack bonus, which is our ability score plus our proficiency where it's applicable, as well as the damage type and what die it does. All that is straight from the book. We pulled it, and so you can do that yourself as well. All right, now we're going to jump into class features. So your class gives you abilities and different cool stuff that you can do. Now, any spellcaster, of course, you're going to be able to choose spells. There is no right or wrong way to do this. I believe Jeff as well, we choose to pick our spells last because I want to see what my class gives me first for free. And then, once I know what I have and what I'm working with, I choose spells that work well with that or maybe cover some weak spots or amplify that kind of stuff. So there's no right or wrong way to do that, but that's how we're going to do it today.
So at this point, we're ready to start getting into our class features and stuff. As Tim said, we're going to save choosing spells for a little bit further down the road, but we do still get some other stuff at level 1. So we are going to be picking the Great Old One as our patron for the Warlock. So as a Warlock, you get a patron, which is basically the source of what gives you your magical power. So there's a bunch of different options. There's 3 in the core book, and then there's a bunch of others that have been added in all the other books and things like that you can find. So there's like a fiend. So if you've made a deal with the devil, or if you've met with the archfey who have granted you fairy magic, a Great Old One, which is kind of this like mysterious, almost like Cthulhu style being from beyond the stars. All the specific lore and stuff you can work with as far as what you want between you and your dungeon master based on the setting and all that. So we won't dwell too specifically on that side of things, but mechanically, it does give us a couple things. So as a Great Old One patron, starting at level 1, we get an ability called Awakened Mind, which basically gives us the ability to communicate telepathically with any creature that we can see within 30 feet. Now it also says we don't have to share a language with that creature for it to understand. As long as it can understand any language at all, it can understand our telepathic messages. So that's just a little neat feature. Basically, since our mind has kind of been warped by this Great Old One's presence, gives us the ability to connect with other people's brains in a similar way. A nice way to talk without having to actually speak out loud and things like that. It can be very useful in a game to have. So it's a nice little feature. And then we'll also get an expanded spell list. So that just means we'll have a couple more options to pick. When we do pick our spells, we'll have the options to pick Dissonant Whispers and Tasha's Hideous Laughter, in addition to the normal Warlock spell list, which we'll cover a little bit later when we start picking spells.
So you notice that I did add Awaken Mind to the sheet because I'm going to use that during the game. I didn't add the expanded spells because I'm just going to, again, make a quick note for myself that when we add, we have some other spells. So we have the Tiefling spells that we're still going to add, these spells as well to choose from. I'm going to keep all that for the end when we do choose our spells, basically, so that I can do that all at once add what I need to the sheet, but it really doesn't make a difference now. I don't need to reference that during the game. I just need it once at character creation, so I don't tend to put it on my character sheet.
So now we are ready to get into probably the thing that most people are looking for when it comes to this video, the spell casting and picking spells and, everything about that with warlocks. So at level 1, we also get access to our packed magic. So the magic that has been bestowed upon us by our patron, and that will give us some spell slots, some cantrips, and just some basic things like that. So we can start off with just getting out some of the very basic details for spell casting out of the way. So things like our spell save DC and our spell attack modifier are easy just to knock out right now while we're here, since that'll then set up all our other spells and things like that later. So the Warlock, as we've mentioned, uses Charisma as its ability modifier for spellcasting. Now we'll also be factoring in our proficiency bonus for all of these things. So the spell save DC is 8 plus proficiency bonus plus Charisma modifier. So 8 plus 2 for our proficiency bonus, let's set at 10, plus 3 from our Charisma modifier will round us out at a 13 spell save DC. So if we cast any spell that needs a saving throw, the enemy has to roll 13 or higher on their saving throw to succeed against our spells. Our spell attack modifier is going to be very similar. That's just proficiency bonus plus Charisma modifier. So that'll just be a nice easy plus 5. And then from there, it's just going to be a matter of setting up our spell slots and picking some spells. So as a Warlock, we start off with just one spell slot, one level 1 spell slot. So that's nice and easy to keep track of. We just have the one to mark down on our sheet. So that'll be good to keep in mind once we start, picking spells in just a little bit. And then we also get access to 2 cantrips. If you remember, because we're a Tiefling, we also have the Thaumaturgy cantrip. So we'll end up with 3 cantrips on our sheet, one of those being from the racial ability that we got earlier, Thaumaturgy. And then we'll also pick 2 cantrips as well from the Warlock's spell list.
I'm struggling to spell Thaumaturgy, and you can leave this in the video. I was going to write it, and I thought, you know what? I don't really know how to spell that, so I'm going to go ahead and look it up, because I couldn't remember if it was the AU after or before the M. So I looked it up because I'm not all-knowing, and I don't know how to spell Thaumaturgy. So, all right, I did that. So we get Thaumaturgy as a cantrip for being a Tiefling, as you had mentioned.
So now that we're kind of in the territory of picking spells, our cantrips first, and then our first level spells pretty soon after. This is where it's just going to take a little bit of work on your own time to look through all the different spells. There's a lot of them that do a lot of different things. Some of them are very, good and very effective. Some of them, are better for combat versus, better for other situations. We'll kind of leave it up to you as far as specifically what spells to research and look into. I'm just going to pick some ones that I know specifically from playing a lot of spellcasters that I'm, very comfortable with and that I know are going to be good and useful for us. So we'll probably rock through those choices here pretty quick, but just know that if you want to dig into the spell lists and what all the spells do, you'll be able to do that and make the choices that'll best suit your character's aesthetic, mechanical preference, style, what you want for the game, and all those different sorts of things. So with that in mind, it's time to pick some cantrips. One of them is going to be a very easy choice, and that's going to be Eldritch Blast. As a Warlock, that's kind of your bread and butter form of attack. It's a very, very powerful cantrip. Most people who play Warlocks will take Eldritch Blast. It's just kind of a standard addition that most people want for the character. Because our strength and dexterity are so bad, we don't want to be using weapons up close a lot. And because we only get the one spell slot, we can't really rely on that for damage either. So you usually want some sort of consistent damage dealing cantrip to have to round your character out. Doesn't have to be Eldritch Blast, but they're the only class that gets access to that spell, and it's a very good one. So for me, that's what I'm going to be going here with for choice 1. So that'll put us with Thaumaturgy from our race, Eldritch Blast for our choice 1, and then we'll get one more cantrip as well. And I think for that, I'm always a big fan of Mage Hand. It's just a nice, cool feature. Lets you do some fun things. And yeah, it just sort of fits, I think, the sort of like spooky telepathic mind reader sort of vibe that we have going on, to have a little bit of telekinesis in there as well, to round out that, aesthetic thing, I think is pretty cool. So yeah, I think as far as our cantrip choices, that'll be what we lock in: Eldritch Blast and Mage Hand.
And something to consider too is like bookmarking these in your player's handbook, or from D&D Beyond, copying and pasting them into like a Google Doc or a Word doc and printing it out, just because this is the triad of stuff that you're going to be doing all the time, because you can do it for free as an action. So meaning it doesn't cost you a spell slot. So you're probably going to be dipping into these quite a bit until you learn them, or even write them on 3x5 index cards, just a quick description. Whatever works so that you can kind of have them on command. That makes a big difference when you're playing, to really not have to stop play and say, hold on, wait, what are my options again? And again, these are just the 3 we chose. Choose whatever you want in the whole wide universe. Some game masters will even let you change them up if you choose one that just turns out to be not what you thought it was going to be. So work with your game master, and of course, especially at level 1, first game, first session, there's going to be a lot of flexibility for most game masters. So don't be afraid. Choose stuff that's fun for you and that fits your character.
So now getting into choosing our level 1 spells. So the chart in the Warlock section will tell you exactly what all these numbers are, the cantrips that you know, the spells that you know, and so on. So that's what we're referencing there to get all that. So we will know 2 level 1 spells that we will have access to. So we'll go ahead and pick what those are going to be now. And then we can use our, right now, 1 spell slot, to cast either one of those spells per short rest. So the Warlocks get their spell slot back on a short rest, which is nice. But getting away from that, back into the spells that we'll be able to pick from. So the Warlock level 1 spell list, I'm just going to pick 2 here again that I, am a fan of. The first one that I'll take is going to be Charm Person. Again, because we've kind of got this like telepathic mind readery sort of thing. It's just a nice way, again, to sort of feature into that same aesthetic of being able to touch someone's mind and get them on your side using your weird magic. It's just a nice little, I think, flavorful choice for this character, kind of how they're shaping up. And then the other one that I'm going to take is going to be Comprehend Languages, which is, again, another fantastic utility spell. Comes up in handy sometimes more often than you'd think. It can be super nice to have access to. And again, sort of plays on this like extra knowledge that you've been granted by your patron. Now you'll notice both of those, neither of those are combat spells. Neither of them deal damage. That's on purpose for me with this character. Kind of given that most of their stuff is kind of utility based, it's nice. Plus, again, especially starting out at level 1, getting only just that 1 spell slot, it's going to be difficult to rely on that for any sort of continuous sustained damage anyways. So might as well get some extra utility out of the spells rather than trying to like rely on picking damage spells when we'll already have things like Eldritch Blast to help us cover that ground. That's just a personal choice for me, knowing that as this character levels up, we'll probably take other damaging spells and other fun things too that we'll be able to do with that.
Okay, now remember, we had an expanded spell list. So the Great Old One, or any of these patrons, the Fiend, in some cases, there are all kinds of patrons you can serve. Because of their like theme and their specialization, serving them gives you access to other spells. Now, we didn't choose any of those spells, but you could have. So at first level, we could have chosen Dissonant Whispers or Tasha's Hideous Laughter because we serve the Great Old One. Someone who serves the Fiend would not get those. They instead would get Burning Hands and Command. Now, those are spells that they can choose, not spells that they automatically get. But by serving a patron, it allows you access to magic that other warlocks don't get. So if you're wondering how the expanded spell list plays into the character creation, it's basically like adding more items to a menu. We just chose to not pick those items, but you could have if you wanted to.
So there we have it. That's most of the stuff that we've needed to add to our character sheet to make this level 1 warlock here. We've got our spells, we've got our equipment. We would also need to add in like our background equipment, the little trinkets and stuff that you get from that. which is easy to find and add as well. We won't take too much time like going over all the fine details of the equipment stuff right there. If you just whatever background you pick, we picked the Hermit, just add that equipment to your list as well, and the proficiencies and things like that. I did just want to real quick while we're talking here about Warlocks. This isn't going to matter so much at level 1, but I imagine it's something that some people will have some questions about. So there's just 2 more things that I wanted to touch on real quick about the Warlock that is sort of different from most of the other spellcasters. Just so if you do watch this and you make a Warlock and you end up leveling up a couple times, just so you can kind of have in mind what some of those changes are going to be for your character. So there's going to be 2 main things I'm going to cover here. The invocations, the Eldritch Invocations, which you start getting at level 2. And then the spell slots for the Warlock are a little bit different compared to how the spell slots work for most of the other classes. So I'll talk a little bit about how those work as you level up as a Warlock as well. So Eldritch Invocations are a class feature that you get once you level up to level 2. You'll be able to pick them. And again, as you continue to level up, you'll have more options available. These are basically like little things that you can get access to that will give you some extra bonuses that can, make your Warlock a little bit more unique compared to other Warlocks. So some of them will like change up how some of your spells work. Some of them will give you extra proficiencies. Some of them will give you like a free spell you can cast once per rest of a certain spell. All the invocations are listed in the book, and whatever resource you're using, D&D Beyond, etc. But just to sort of keep in mind some examples, for example, one of the invocations that we might be interested in for this character would be something like Agonizing Blast, which basically means when you cast Eldritch Blast, you add your Charisma modifier to the damage that it deals on a hit. So a nice way to get some extra damage out of our consistent damage-dealing spell. And another one that could be interesting as well is one called Armor of Shadows. So you can cast Mage Armor on yourself at will without expending a spell slot or material components. So, given that all we have right now is leather armor with a 0 dexterity modifier, armor class is going to be a bit of a weak point for this character. It will be hit a lot if we're getting attacked. So, Mage Armor is a spell that gets you extra armor class. So, it's a nice way just to make sure that we don't have to use our one of our 2 spells at level 1 that we get to pick, or our single spell slot that we have access to get us a little bit of extra armor class. So, something like that could also be super handy as well. And you can use that at will. So there's not any restrictions. Just anytime you could cast a spell, you can use that spell to cast Mage Armor without using a spell slot, without using any resources. So super handy. Now, some of the invocations do have prerequisites as far as, what level you have to be, or if you have to have picked a certain patron or a certain pact feature, and things like that. Mm-hmm. That'll all be listed in the invocations as you pick them. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of different choices that can all add, modify abilities and proficiencies and things like that. And you'll get more invocations as you continue to level up. So just a nice thing to keep out for once you hit level 2 and going on. And the level up chart for the Warlock that has all the spell slots and everything will also tell you how many invocations you get at what level. So a nice, easy thing to do there.
So the thing to remember about Eldritch Invocations is that while they might be tied to your patron, think of these as your own personal Warlock's study of strange forbidden knowledge and these fragments of the occult and things like that. And so these are the way that you can basically beef up your Warlock in some ways related to your patron, but in some ways maybe not. Some just have a level prerequisite where you just have to be 7th level. So these are almost like your own, studies, your own reaching into the occult, into weirdness. And so just think of them that way. When I first started learning about the Warlock, I didn't know how these were related to the patron. And the truth is, they don't have to be. These are just your own thing that you're pushing into. Some of them can beef up a thing that your patron gives you or something like that, but they don't have to. So I just wanted to explicitly state that this is like a separate chain of abilities if you want it to be.
And then one last quick note about both the invocations and the spells, which is good to note for the Warlock, is anytime that you level up as a Warlock, you can choose to replace a spell that you know with a different spell that you would rather know instead. And same goes for the invocations. So you might pick a spell at level 1, and it's useful at level 1, but then you start to get to level 3 or 4 or 5, and it's not quite really doing what you need it to do anymore. When you level up, you can say, actually, Charm Person is not doing what I thought it was going to do. It's like not quite as useful as I was hoping. We're kind of like getting past it in the scope of the campaign. Now that I'm hitting level 4 from level 3, I'm going to take away Charm Person, and I'm going to add any other spell on the list that I want to, that I can pick, basically. As long as it's a spell that you are appropriate level to be able to cast, you can replace it on a 1-to-1. It is only once per level, so you don't get to just replace everything, at any point whenever you level up. But it's still just a nice way to be able to continue to like advance and evolve your character. And same thing with the invocations. So you might find that like, we took this mage armor invocation, but then I got like a magical robe that gives me like a better armor class anyways. So now that I'm leveling up, I might swap that out for something that lets me do more damage or get a new proficiency or, whatever it is. So just things to keep in mind. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about here for the Warlock is the way that the spell slot works, because it's a little bit different than the way that other classes work. And it's just worth real quick sort of covering that ground. So the Warlock is different from the other classes that have spell casting, where most classes have a lot of spell slots that are of different levels that they can use to cast whatever spells that slot level is appropriate for, as we talked about in our magic video. The Warlock only has one type of spell slot and has a lesser number of spell slots than the other classes, but they get their spell slots back on a short rest instead of a long rest, so that kind of changes up how their economy flows. And their spell slots only have one type of level that continues to advance as their character grows. Now, that does change a couple things in terms of how your spells get cast. As we mentioned in the spellcasting video, when you cast a spell using a higher level slot than that spell level, so if I use a level 2 spell slot to cast a level 1 spell, you might get additional effects that spell will get from using the higher level slot. And that'll be detailed in any individual spell that has that capability. Now you'll notice looking at the spell slot level of the Warlock that there's just the one number there listed. So let's say, for example, I level up to level 3. Now you'll notice at level 3, I will have 2 spell slots, and the spell slot level will be 2nd level. So rather than, another class which might have a couple level 1 slots and then 1 level 2 slot, for me as a Warlock, all my spell slots will automatically be level 2 from the time I hit 3rd level and beyond. And any spell that I cast using that slot will be counted as being cast at that level. So if I cast any spell at level 3, it'll be counted as using a 2nd level spell slot. So for a level 2 spell, it'll just use like normal. But if I cast a level 1 spell, it'll count with any additional effects that would be used and gotten from casting at a 2nd level slot instead of a 1st level slot. So it's just a way that it works a little bit differently for the Warlocks that I just want to be able to try to clear up at least as best as I can. Rather than having a bunch of different slots of different levels that you get to pick and choose, you just have all your slots are the level that it says on the character creation chart. And as you use them, it's always cast at that level, and that number will continue to grow and change as your Warlock levels up. So just keep an eye out when you level up and you're checking out what new spells you get, and if your proficiency bonus goes up, and if you get any new cantrips or invocations, that you also take a look at the spell slot level just to make sure you're keeping up with what you'll be able to cast and, how much to add to each of the extra spells that you start to work with and all of that.
Yeah, and this was confusing to me until the way I thought of it was, because I'm learning these things on my own as a Warlock, because I'm scraping into the darkness and kind of, figuring this stuff out. And I'm trying to, level myself up. The spell slots level with me, because the better I get as a Warlock, the better these spells get. All the other classes, as Jeff said, they kind of unlock certain spell slots of different levels. Whereas the Warlock, because they're sort of bootstrapping magic and making it happen themselves, their spell slots literally level up with them. And so once I figured it that way, I was like, oh, cool, okay. So like Jeff said, just kind of take a look at the book and say, where have my spell slots leveled up recently? And that will help you because it's cool, because that means that all the spells that you're casting are imbued with your ability as a warlock to sort of draw from these dark powers. All right, so that is how you make a warlock. If you obviously want to follow along with us, feel free to do that. We'll also take this character sheet as it is and make it so that you could download it from our Google Drive if you want to just use this one. Feel free to do it. Sometimes it's easier to just shift around some things, so like change one spell out. So if you want to do that, you can as well. But we are Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, tabletop games. And so if you like that sort of thing, consider subscribing and then hitting the bell so that you get notified whenever we post videos just like this. We want to know, what questions do you have? So for the comments in this video specifically, what questions do you have? And we'll try to answer them. Now, if you have a specific question about character creation, we might point you to our first video that we did of the Dwarven Fighter, but let us know. Let's go ahead and end with the Tabtarian toast. I guess, will you start?
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
And may you conquer everything you undertake.
James-less toast. Sláinte. So the thing about making characters in 5e is that I've been doing it now for, if you count when the first starter set came out, it's been like 5 years, right? Pretty much 5 years plus. I still stop every time I go, wait, then what is it? Oh, right. Okay. Oh, yeah, right. It's like, it's never such a fluid or I'll miss something and I won't find out until I start playing the game that I forgot it. So I just think like making a character is something that you should never feel like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, most people don't memorize the process. It's something that you kind of look at the book every time, or at least jog your memory every time, and that's totally fine. Like, again, the whole thing with 5e, most of it, there's a book for a reason. Don't feel like you have to memorize it all. And if you forget something or you don't know something, just check the book.